Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Amari's Revenge. The goddess next door is confronted by a Nubian queen out for revenge at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in this inaugural Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Amari's Revenge in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Better get the cold slow, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. I got some comments from some bootlicks in Black Fandom who want to try to excuse the Black Commissioner Gordon that's a part of the new Batman animated series, Batman Cape Crusader. Now, in the new Batman animated series, Batman Cape Crusader, they're going to be featuring a Black Commissioner Gordon and a Black Barbara Gordon. Now, this flies in the face of American history because in the 1930s, no black man would be allowed to be a police commissioner in any city due to the racism and discrimination that went on here in America. And the inclusion of a Black Commissioner Gordon and Barbara Gordon may be something that those on the far left believe that they need to include as related to their attempt to create diversity and inclusion in this series that is set in the period of the Golden Age of the 1930s, but this is not historically accurate and ironically basically perpetuates the same anti-black racism that they're trying to avoid dealing with. And sadly, the response from some in Black Fandom is quite troubling to me because instead of standing up with many white comic fans who see this whole inclusion of a Black Commissioner Gordon as historically inaccurate, what these bootlicks are looking to do is trying to excuse Warner Brothers, Amazon, and Bruce Timm for creating this Black Jim Gordon, and others are trying to minimize this whole decision to include these black characters in this historically inaccurate adaptation. Now, these black bootlicks are people who basically want to be a part of fandom and are willing to compromise their integrity and character, but in this case I've got to stand up to them because I refuse to deny black history and deny all of the struggles foundational black Americans in this country have gone through, because that's what's being done here with Batman Cape Crusader. We have Warner Brothers, Amazon, and Bruce Timm basically going out here and denying black history and denying black history by trying to include this black character who in a job that they wouldn't have at the time. Now, yes, there were black police officers in northern cities in some areas, but they were in low-level positions and were not able to advance in any way, shape, or form due to the racism and discrimination that went on in the North. And this is a historically accurate fact as related to the state of the country at the time, and it should be reflected if you're going to do a story set in a period. And while that may be something that may make some people uncomfortable as related to that time, we have to acknowledge what went on in a period of history if you're going to do an accurate adaptation. Now, these black bootlicks in fandom, what they want to say is, oh, this is an adaptation, and because it's an adaptation set in a fantasy world, we should not really be that upset about them creating a world with this black police commissioner. And that's a cop-out by individuals who basically want to continue maintaining a covert contract where they hope to gain acceptance and approval from anybody in fandom, especially whites in fandom, and they're willing to make any excuse to do this, including looking to sacrifice their intangibles of character and sacrifice our history as foundational black Americans. And I'm not going to let these kind of individuals give this a pass, because this basically opens the door for companies like Amazon and Warner Brothers and guys like Bruce Timm to go out here and look to erase black history and look to erase black history in other adaptations in an effort to promote a revisionist narrative to deny what happened to black people in that time of the 1930s, where the country was under the whole system of white supremacy and Jim Crow ruled the land. While that may make people uncomfortable, we have to have discussions about race and racism in history. We have to have these discussions about racism in history, and in films and media, we have to present this as it actually happened, and we have to do this because that's how we include black people, and by acknowledging the history that came before us and acknowledging that history so everybody can understand the racism that went on in that time. And I have to wonder what happened to Bruce Timm, or was it Dwayne McDuffie who came in and as related to the Justice League Season 2 episode where the Justice League went back into this alternate universe. I mean, I wonder what happened here, because Bruce Timm back then, in about 2000 or 2001, he didn't have a problem in that episode showing a scene where Jon Stewart is basically trying to help out the character, the Streak, who was a adaptation of the Golden Age Flash. And I remember in one of those episodes where he said, the Streak said, "You're a credit to your people, son." And while some people got offended by that statement, it was historically accurate, and I was happy to see that he actually included that in that episode, because if you're dealing with Golden Age heroes, their whole worldview was going to be different, and when they saw a black hero, they were going to see that black hero from that perspective in history. And when he said, "You're a credit to your people, son," I didn't get upset about that line, because I knew, okay, if this character is set in the period of the 1930s, yes, this character would say something like that, and maybe it is racist, and yes, I will say it was racist, but that was the part of the story, and it was about helping people grow and learn about racism, and then learn to grow out of these whole perceptions of prejudice that happened at that time. I mean, we have to have these discussions regarding these periods in history, but sadly there are those black folks in fandom who don't want to have these discussions. No, what they want to do is basically deny the issues of racism as related to comics, science fiction, and fantasy. And because they want to deny the racism that goes on in the content of these comics, deny the racism that goes on behind the scenes in the comic book industry, the sci-fi and fantasy industries, and even in the entertainment industry, this is why we do not get accurate adaptations of black life. And because we don't get the accurate adaptations of black life, we don't get a clear picture of black people and how we lived in the world as related to the world of science fiction and fantasy. Now, these people will sit, these black bootlicks, what they will say is, no, we can't really have these kind of stories because it's all fantasy. No, but if you have fantasy that's set in a time period, then that fantasy has to reflect what happened in that time period. And that's where I have this bone to pick with this Batman Cape Crusader series. I have a bone to pick with them because, again, we cannot deny black history. We cannot deny the racism that went on because, again, Black Commissioner Gordon, yes, you want to call yourself race swapping to do this passive-aggressive diversity and inclusion, but by participating in this diversity and inclusion, you're basically participating in anti-black racism, because what you're doing is denying black history, and denying black history to keep people from seeing what really went on in those dark days of Jim Crow. And again, if Superman can fight the Klan, then we need to see Batman taking on racism in that period of Jim Crow to show how it basically is wrong. And that's not something you can do when you've got a black Commissioner Gordon. No, if you want to introduce new supporting characters and tackle race in an episode, that's perfectly fine. But we've got to show what happened in those times so people can get an understanding of things as related to history. People need to understand what went on with black people in those times. And what's really sad is you've got black folks out here who don't want us to talk about this history because what they want to do is, again, create this covert contract where they believe that if they give a pass to all of those in fandom who are white and non-black, they believe if they give those in fandom a pass, what they will be able to do is get a door open for themselves to be a part of overall general fandom and get that pass to be a part of general fandom and hopefully, possibly, if they have some skills, get a door open for themselves where they can go out here and get either a job as a comic book writer or a comic book artist. But as I see it, my intangibles as a black man and my integrity as a black man are not something I'm going to compromise. And that's where me and black fandom have a serious issue, because I'm not going to compromise my integrity and I'm not going to compromise on my stance as related to someone who loves himself as a heterosexual black man and someone who believes in black empowerment. No, I'm not going to compromise my integrity to try to go out here and try to be a part of that covert contract seeking white acceptance. No, when it comes to images of black people, I'm going to stand up to try to get the best images of black people out there. That's what I do every day on my SJS Direct imprint. I'm all about looking to go out here and present positive images of black people, and I'm out here trying to present a positive stories about the black experience. And when I go out here and present stories about the black experience, even though I know that the whole issue of racism may make some people uncomfortable, I'm not afraid to go out here and talk about what happened in the past and even what goes on right now. In much of my fantasy, I deal with the racism that went on in different periods. Like in one story I wrote called Isis Imitation of Life, I talk about the whole idea of being a black hero during the days of Jim Crow. I talk about the lack of opportunities and discrimination black people suffered and how many black people still went on to live very well in spite of all of that racism. And I talk about this also in another book I did called Spellbound, where I talk about the whole area of Sugar Hill and the history of Sugar Hill, one of the most richest black neighborhoods even in the time of Jim Crow, and how, yes, there were black professionals, but when it came to these jobs in government, there was a lot of discrimination that went on. Again, I acknowledge all of this in history and as related to our past and the racism that went on. And even with the modern times, I talk about not only the racism that went on in fantasy stories I did, like The Temptation of John Haynes, where I show a scene where the John Haynes character is racially profiled by his own security team at Morris Phillips, but I also talk about the intra-racism that goes on as related to class. I go in depth on black culture to show the racism that black people go through, and I do that so that when people read my books, they're not only getting entertained, they're getting educated as well to the reality of life in the world and the reality of the injustice that has been done to foundational black Americans in this country. And that's, again, why I have this issue with Batman Cape Crusader, and I also have a beef with these black bootlicks in fandom who want to say, oh, it's just fantasy. No, when it comes to fantasy that goes out here and denies us, that's something I'm not gonna tolerate. No, I'm not gonna tolerate fantasy that denies us and our history, because to deny our history is to deny us, and I'm not willing to do that to gain acceptance into overall fandom. No, I can't deny our history and everything that my ancestors and my descendants went through in this country, because that's the ultimate form of selling out, and that's not a compromise I'm going to make. No, I don't believe you need to make that kind of compromise to be a part of fandom, because as someone who is passionate about comics, passionate about science fiction and fantasy, I know it's possible to go out here and tell historically accurate stories and tackle racism that went on. And this could have been done in Batman Cape Crusader the same way it was done in that Justice League episode, as related to the Justice League going to that alternate world featuring Golden Age characters. And it was also done in a recent comic series called Superman vs. the Klan. So it's possible to go out here and do stories that present actual justice and show black people getting justice. And it's further possible to go out here and expand on those concepts by showing us a world where black people were heroes in that time. And while we weren't superheroes who were putting on capes and tights, we were heroes that were out here showing how we were human. And again, showing how we were human in a world that dehumanized us. And that's where the real story is. And that was what had me so passionate to write the story, Isis Imitation of Life, which was inspired by the 1934 cinematic film, which talked about the issue of black people having an imitation life compared to white people who were allowed to have a full life. I mean, that movie has a lot of things that people would consider to be racist, but I looked at that film and it was an inspiration to me, because it helped me to see that, yes, you could show how we were living real lives and not the imitation life that racists thought we were living, and go more in depth with this and showing it in a fantasy perspective, and showing how we were fighting for our rights to be able to live in this country, even as we were before the civil rights movement. I mean, there was a lot going on here as related to black people. And again, when it comes to science fiction and fantasy and adaptations of science fiction and fantasy, we barely scratched the surface. And we barely scratched the surface because many bootlicks out here want to go out here and play the role of buffer. They want to play the role of buffer in hoping to be gatekeepers. And these gatekeepers basically want to keep people like me out of the whole circle of fandom. That's where I'm start to see all this friction going on as related to different people. Like there was this guy I just roasted a few weeks ago, and this guy Coffee Comics. These guys don't really want to see guys like me coming into the world of fandom, because what they don't want me to do is call out a lot of the racism that goes on and hold many of these people accountable. And now I have been doing this for many years, calling out this racism, even in the days of the Sean James Black freelance writer blog, and people have been talking about me for years. But on different message boards, they've been talking about how I talk about racism in the comic book industry. And again, I don't want to stop talking about it, because as I see it, the whole thing is we need to educate those in fandom the same way a black person educated late writer Mark Grunwald on the whole idea of a black Bucky, because that black person told them that, okay, they wanted to have a new Bucky who was Lamar Hoskins. They wanted to have a black man in the Bucky costume, again, for diversity. But the whole term of Buck was really racist, because it was comparing a black man to an animal one, and saying that a black man was a Buck was basically dehumanizing him and making him fit into a stereotype of being this sexually promiscuous, big muscular black man that is basically a part of the brute stereotype. And because of that letter, Mark Grunwald got some perspective, and he got the perspective and realized, okay, the whole idea of a black Bucky is offensive, because you got a black man in a child's costume, basically emasculating that black man. 1, 2, you've got the black man with a name that is a stereotype. And Mark Grunwald, basically after hearing this, got some perspective and decided to revamp Lamar Hoskins and turned him into the character of Battlestar. Now, Marvel editorial didn't do much with that character, but he was repackaged in a way that made him more positive, and that was all due to black people going out here and letting a white creator know, okay, you've made this mistake, now you need to correct this mistake. And in the case of this black James Gordon and Barbara Gordon, I'm that guy who's going to say, yeah, you made a mistake. And you've even got white comic YouTubers and white creators saying, yeah, you made a mistake. If you're going to do a Batman animated series, yeah, you need, if you're set in the 30s, then it needs to reflect the 30s, and you need to make it where we see things that are accurate. Because again, yes, there were black police officers, but there were no black police commissioners, because racists would throw a fit if they were ever to see that in that time. And that's something that, again, a black person should be calling out, and black people should be calling out first. I mean, it's a shame that you've got white comic creators and white YouTubers who are part of Fandom who are calling this out, but you don't have black people calling it out in Fandom. No, what you get are these bootlicks who basically want to excuse and deny black history, and that's really troubling to me that you would go to those lengths. Because if they did a Batman series set in the 30s or the 40s and went out here and said, oh, there was nothing going on in World War II as related to Hitler, and looked to deny what went on as related to Jews in that time, that whole series would basically be taken off the air. And because what we see right now with people as related to these Holocaust deniers, these people wind up with their channels getting taken down and flagged and terminated, because that is going against history, and it basically is a revision of history that is seen as hate speech. And when I look at the efforts to revise black history to say that the racism that we went through, that's similar to that as I see it, I mean, that just is reprehensible to say, oh, we had a black police commissioner and black people were running around free even in the North, when that wasn't accurate, because we had things like sundown towns in the Midwest, and even in certain parts, you couldn't even go to certain neighborhoods in cities like New York. I mean, even right now, black people can't go to certain neighborhoods. That's why we had incidents like in the 80s with Bensonhurst and Howard Beach. If you go into certain neighborhoods, this happens. And again, you can't go out here and just race swap characters as related to time periods. It's just not something that should be acceptable, because if you deny one part of history, you'll start denying other parts of history, and that's where I got an issue with these black bootlicks in Fandom. These black bootlicks in Fandom, what they want to do is deny black history, and sorry, that's a line I'm not going to cross. No, that's not a line I'm going to cross, even though I'm a big-time comic fan and sci-fi and fantasy fan ever since I was 4 years old. When it comes to history, I'm not going to deny black history, and when it comes to bootlicks, I'm going to stand up to these bootlicks in Fandom, because this is inexcusable. It's inexcusable to go out here and deny our history and deny all that many of our ancestors went through and our relatives went through. I mean, we got grandmothers, great-grandmothers who could tell you stories about what happened. And again, all of this could have easily become an episode. If you wanted to do one set in the golden age of Batman Cape Crusader, could have been a powerful episode that could have been written. Because if I can go out here and write a story like Isis Imitation of Life and talk about the racism that went on in that period, then why can't Bruce Timm and the people over at Warner Brothers craft a script in that period? I mean, if you want to talk about being about social justice, you really shouldn't be talking about, oh, we want to include a black Commissioner Gordon. No, let's tackle the racism that went on in that period. Let's present it accurately. Let's present it where if you have something like a black police officer, showing him going through the racism, show how there was police brutality going on at that time, show how there were rogue and racist police officers. I mean, really show us a rich, multidimensional character in that time, and how he's dealing with struggles not only with the white racist at the time in the police department of Gotham City, but also show us how he's dealing with issues with people in his neighborhood. Basically show him like in a brownstone area dealing with all the struggles that black people went through. I mean, this is the kind of storytelling that could be very compelling and really get people to watch. But when you have shallow people who are social justice warriors working on a show, what they'll do is just take a shallow approach to things, talking about, again, passively including people, but aggressively avoiding dealing with the actual racism and actually participating in worse racism than going out here and just avoiding dealing with black people overall in the story. I mean, that's what you get when you have people who are out here denying history, and even worse when you're dealing with these bootlicks. Again, these people are even worse. And as a comic fan, I am just deeply troubled about so many bootlicks being in fandom. I mean, what's really troubling to me is that you have these individuals who, again, look to make excuses for anything as related to black people, look to make excuses to the point of the extreme that you're going to deny even talking about anything because you want to go out here and get acceptance as related to white people. And again, that frame of spellbound thinking where you're going to fit yourself into a black box where you're going to deny blackness and deny black history, that's going too far for me. And that's where we gotta take a stand against these type of individuals because they are impeding progress, because producers like Bruce Timm and many others at Warner Brothers, they need to know, okay, well, you want to make a new Batman animated series, but if you're going to set it in the 30s, then we're going to be all about the 30s. And when it comes to black people in the 30s, we cannot have tokenized race swap characters in a time period. No, we can't have tokenized race swap characters. We gotta show what actually happened in that time and show how Batman was a hero to black people by standing up against racism the same way Superman stood up against the Klan. Now, if you want to read my story set in the golden age of comics that showed how black people were heroes in the golden age as related to overcoming Jim Crow before the civil rights movement, you can pick up my book, ISIS Imitation of Life, in paperback and Kindle format on Amazon.com, and you can also find ISIS Imitation of Life on Kindle Unlimited, and if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read ISIS Imitation of Life for free. And if you want to pick up some of my action-packed fantasy fiction featuring characters who are black in the SJS Direct universe, you can pick up the books like the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy like Spellbound, my black sorority novel The Thetas, my black vampire novel Eternal Night, and you can also pick up my SJS Direct comics like Esteem No Good Deed and John Haynes at Death's Door. You can find Esteem No Good Deed for 99 cents on Kindle, and you can get John Haynes at Death's Door in paperback on Lulu.com. I'm hoping to get it to Amazon soon as the At Death's Door manga edition. So I'm trying to make more comics, and I can only do that with your help. So if you guys could drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App, that'd be greatly appreciated. And that's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback at e-readers, ISIS, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Get your copy of ISIS, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Illuminati. The man who rules the world takes on the head of the global elite in this all-new action-packed John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes, Illuminati in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Get your copy of Esteem Horror in the Hamptons in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.